There are moments in life that feel like a coincidence, a number on a clock, a phrase in a song, a stranger's words that echo what you prayed about in secret. But what if I told you that nothing, absolutely nothing, happens by accident? Sarah didn't believe it either. Not until the night she found herself staring at 3:33 a.m. on her phone for the 7th time that week. At the same time, her late father used to wake her for midnight prayers when she was a child. She thought she was losing her mind until she discovered what was really happening. Welcome to the wisdom of time, where we uncover the spiritual encounters hiding in plain sight. Today's story will make you question every coincidence you've ever dismissed. Because when God decides to get your attention, He doesn't knock quietly. What happened next changed Sarah's life forever. And if you're watching this right now, it might not be a coincidence either. Sarah Martinez was 34 years old, and her life had become a maze she couldn't find her way out of. Every morning started the same way. The alarm is at 5:45 a.m. The rush to get her 2 kids, Miguel, age 9, and Sophia, age 6, ready for school. The frantic drive through Phoenix traffic to drop them off before her shift started at Desert Valley Hospital. She was a nurse in the cardiac unit, 12-hour shifts, sometimes 14 when they were understaffed, which was almost always. Her ex-husband had left 2 years ago, no warning, just a text message saying he needed to find himself and a forwarding address in California. Child support came sporadically, if at all. Sarah had stopped expecting it. The bills piled up on her kitchen counter like a mountain she'd never climb. Rent, utilities, car payment, student loans from nursing school that felt like they'd follow her to the grave. She worked double shifts whenever she could, picking up extra hours on weekends, sacrificing sleep for survival. But money wasn't even her biggest problem. The real problem was the emptiness. 3 years ago, her father, Roberto Martinez, had died from pancreatic cancer, 6 months from diagnosis to funeral. Sarah had watched him waste away in a hospital bed, praying every single night for a miracle that never came. She'd begged God to save him, pleaded, made promises she meant with every fiber of her being. She'd even fasted for 3 days straight, something her father had taught her when she was young. But he died anyway, and something inside Sarah died with him. She stopped going to church, stopped reading her Bible, stopped praying altogether. What was the point? She'd done everything right, believed with childlike faith, and God had stayed silent while her father suffered. Her kids would ask sometimes, "Mommy, why don't we pray before dinner anymore?" And Sarah would change the subject. She'd become an expert at changing the subject. At work, she moved through her days on autopilot. Take vitals, administer medication, smile at patients, comfort families, go home, collapse, repeat. Her coworkers thought she was handling everything well. Strong, independent, resilient. They had no idea that most nights, after the kids were asleep, Sarah sat in her bathroom with the door locked and cried until she had nothing left. She felt like she was drowning in slow motion, and nobody could see it, not even herself, most days. But then something strange started happening. It began on a Tuesday afternoon. Sarah was on her lunch break in the hospital cafeteria, scrolling mindlessly through her phone when she glanced at the time. 3:33 p.m. She thought nothing of it and went back to eating her wilted salad. That evening, after picking up the kids from after-school care, she checked her car clock while waiting at a red light. 3:33 p.m. Weird. She could have sworn more time had passed. The next morning, she woke up before her alarm, disoriented, feeling like someone had called her name. She reached for her phone to check the time. 3:33 a.m. A chill ran down her spine. This was the exact time, the exact minute her father used to wake her up when she was a little girl. Back when faith felt natural. Back when talking to God felt as simple as talking to the person sitting next to you. Her father would gently shake her awake at 3:33 in the morning, and they'd kneel by her bed together and pray. He told her that the quiet hours before dawn were when God listened most closely, when the world was still asleep and the noise of life couldn't drown out his voice. Sarah hadn't thought about those prayers in years. She shook off the memory and tried to go back to sleep. Just a coincidence. The mind plays tricks when you're exhausted. But the next night, it happened again. She jolted awake, heart racing, grabbed her phone. 3:33 a.m. In the night after that. By the seventh morning in a row, Sarah's hands were trembling as she stared at the glowing numbers on her screen. This wasn't coincidence anymore. This was something else. Something that terrified her. Because if this was real, if her father was somehow reaching out from beyond, or if God was trying to break through the walls she'd built, then she'd have to face everything she'd been running from. The anger, the grief, the questions that had no answers. She sat up in bed, the room dark except for the soft glow of her phone. Her voice came out as a broken whisper. "Dad, if this is you, I don't know what you want from me." The silence felt heavier than it should. "I'm so tired. I'm so angry. And I don't know how to stop feeling like God abandoned us when we needed him most." Still nothing, no voice from heaven, no sudden peace. Just Sarah alone in the dark with a number that wouldn't let her forget. But something had shifted. A door she'd welded shut was starting to crack open and light was bleeding through, whether she was ready for it or not. The next morning at work, Sarah looked like death. Her coworker, Grace Chen, noticed immediately. Grace was 62, had been a nurse for 40 years, and had the kind of eyes that saw through every facade. "Girl, you look like you've been fighting demons all night." Sarah managed a weak smile. "Something like that." They were restocking supplies in the cardiac unit when Grace put down the blood pressure cuffs and turned to face Sarah directly. "Talk to me." Sarah hesitated. She wasn't someone who opened up easily, especially not about anything spiritual. But there was something about Grace, a warmth, a safety that made the walls come down. So she told her everything. The 3:33 wake-ups, 7 nights in a row, the exact time her father used to pray with her. The feeling that she was losing her mind or being haunted or something she couldn't explain. Grace listened without interrupting. Her expression stayed calm and understanding. When Sarah finished, Grace was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, 333. "You know what that number means?" Sarah shook her head. "The Holy Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. It's woven through the entire Bible like a thread you can't miss once you start looking. Jesus prayed 3 times in the Garden of Gethsemane. He was crucified at the 3rd hour. He rose on the 3rd day. Peter denied him 3 times and was restored 3 times. Sarah felt goosebumps rise on her arms. Grace continued, her voice gentle but firm. "When God wants to get your attention, when he has something important to say, he doesn't send a singing telegram. He speaks in patterns, in repetition, in signs that build until you can't ignore them anymore." "But why now?" Sarah's voice cracked. "Why 3 years after my dad died? Why not when I was actually praying, when I actually believed?" Grace smiled sadly. "Maybe because you weren't ready to hear it then. Maybe you had to walk through the valley first. Maybe God was waiting for the moment you'd actually listen instead of just going through the motions." The words hit Sarah like a punch to the chest. Because Grace was right. Before her father died, Sarah's faith had been comfortable. Easy. She'd prayed because that's what good people did, went to church because it was Sunday, believed because she'd never had a reason not to. But she'd never really wrestled with God. Never really needed him in a way that went beyond surface-level gratitude. Not until everything fell apart. Grace squeezed her shoulder. "Don't be afraid of what you're feeling. God can handle your anger, your doubt, your questions. He's not fragile, but he also won't force his way in. He knocks. And he'll keep knocking until you decide to open the door." Sarah didn't know what to say, so she just nodded. That night, after putting the kids to bed, Sarah found herself standing in front of her bedroom closet. She hadn't opened the top shelf in 3 years, hadn't wanted to face what was up there. Her father's things, the box she'd shoved away after the funeral. With shaking hands, she pulled it down. Inside was his old Bible, worn leather, pages soft from decades of use. Notes were scribbled in the margins in his messy handwriting, verses underlined, coffee stains on the cover. Sarah's eyes burned with tears. She opened it carefully, like it might disintegrate in her hands. And as she flipped through the pages, something fell out. A folded piece of notebook paper, yellow with age. She unfolded it. and her father's handwriting stared back at her. "My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. I wrote this letter 6 months ago, right after the diagnosis. I wanted to leave you something for the moment when you'd need it most. I know you'll be angry, at God, at me for leaving, at the unfairness of it all. And sweetheart, that's okay, be angry, scream, cry, question everything. But don't stay there. God has plans for you that you can't see yet. Plans that required you to go through fire so you could come out as gold. I won't be there to see them unfold, but I've been praying for that moment every single day since I got sick. The moment you'll understand that losing me wasn't the end of your story. It was the beginning. When you feel lost, remember Jeremiah 29:11. And remember that I'm not really gone. I'm just waiting on the other side, and I'm so proud of who you're becoming. Keep praying, Mija, even when it hurts, especially when it hurts. Oh, my love, Dad. P.S. Don't forget about 3:33. Remember what I always told you. The Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit are never closer than in the quiet hours before dawn. Sarah's entire body shook as she sobbed. He knew, somehow he knew this would happen, that she'd walk away from God, that she'd need to be reminded, that she'd need 3:33. She looked at her phone through blurred vision. The time read 3:33 a.m. But this time, instead of fear, she felt something else. Something she hadn't felt in 3 years. Hope! Sarah turned to Jeremiah 29:11, her fingers trembling as she found the page her father had dog-eared. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. She read it again, and again, and again. Then she did something she hadn't done since the night her father died. She prayed, not a desperate bargain, not a list of demands, not a rehearsed prayer from childhood, just 3 words, raw and honest and breaking. I'm still here. The room stayed quiet, but Sarah felt something shift in her chest, like a locked door finally swinging open, like oxygen rushing into lungs that had forgotten how to breathe. She wasn't healed, wasn't suddenly okay, wasn't magically free from grief or doubt or exhaustion, but she was present, and for the first time in 3 years, that felt like enough. Over the next few days, something strange continued to happen. The number 3 started appearing everywhere, not just at 3:33, everywhere. Sarah would be making breakfast, and 3 birds would land on her windowsill at the exact same moment. She'd be driving to work, and the car in front of her would have a license plate ending in 333. She'd check her patient charts, and 3 people in a row would have been admitted on March 3rd. At first, she thought she was just noticing it because she was looking for it. The brain does that, finds patterns where there aren't any. But then things got stranger. One morning, Miguel asked for 3 pancakes instead of his usual 2. No reason, just a sudden preference. That afternoon, Sophia came home from school with a drawing she'd made. 3 stick figures holding hands under a sun with 3 rays. Who are these? Sarah asked, trying to keep her voice steady. That's you, me, and Miguel, Sophia said. Then she pointed at the sun. And that's Grandpa watching over us. Sarah's throat tightened. That evening at work, 3 patients in a row thanked Sarah for her care and said almost the same thing. God bless you. Different people, different rooms, same exact words. It was like the universe, or something bigger, was screaming at her. Pay attention. This matters. Don't look away. Grace noticed Sarah's distraction during their shift. You're seeing them, aren't you? The signs. Sarah nodded slowly. Everywhere, it's like, I don't know how to explain it. It feels like someone's trying to tell me something, but I don't know what. Grace smiled knowingly. Then maybe you need to stop guessing and start asking. Asking who? You know who. Sarah wanted to argue, wanted to say she'd tried praying and nothing happened. But that wasn't true. She'd prayed once, barely 3 words, and something had shifted. What if she actually tried? Really tried? That night, after the kids were asleep, Sarah sat on her bed with her father's Bible open in her lap. She didn't know where to start, so she just let the pages fall open naturally. The Gospel of Matthew, chapter 18, verse 20. For where 2 or 3 gather in my name, there am I with them. There it was again. 3. Sarah's heart raced. She flipped to another random page. John 2:1. The wedding at Cana where Jesus turned water into wine. He did it on the 3rd day. Another random page. Luke 13:32. Jesus saying, I will keep on driving out demons and healing people today and tomorrow, and on the 3rd day I will reach my goal. The 3rd day. Over and over and over again. Sarah closed the Bible and pressed it against her chest. Okay, she whispered into the darkness. I'm listening. I don't know what you want me to do, but I'm listening. No audible voice answered her. No burning bush, no miracle. Just a deep, settling peace that felt like a hand on her shoulder. The following Tuesday started like any other, except Sarah woke up at 3:33 a.m. without feeling afraid. She actually smiled. Good morning, she whispered to the empty room, as if her father or God might actually hear. Her shift that day was brutal. 3 emergency admits, 2 code blues. 1 family screamed at her for something beyond her control. She was running on fumes by the time her break came at 6 p.m. Sarah stepped outside to the hospital's back courtyard, desperate for fresh air. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. She closed her eyes and just breathed. That's when she heard it. Sobbing! Sarah opened her eyes and looked around. At first, she didn't see anyone. Then she spotted her, a woman sitting on the curb near the emergency room entrance, her face buried in her hands, shoulders shaking. People walked past her. Doctors, nurses, and visitors. No one stopped. Sarah almost didn't either. She was exhausted. Her feet hurt. Her kids were waiting at home with the babysitter who charged by the hour. But something stopped her. That same voice, wordless but impossible to ignore, that had been whispering to her for weeks. She walked over and sat down on the curb next to the woman. Are you okay? The woman looked up and Sarah's heart broke. Her makeup was ruined, mascara streaking down her face. Her eyes were red and swollen. She looked destroyed. My daughter, the woman choked out. She's inside. They don't know if she's going to make it. Sarah's chest tightened. What happened? Overdose fentanyl. She's only 22. The woman's voice cracked. I've been praying all day, begging God, but I don't even know if he hears me anymore. I don't know if he cares. Sarah saw herself in this woman's eyes. The desperation, the doubt, the feeling of shouting into a void that never answers back. She took the woman's hand without thinking. He hears you. The woman looked at her with something between hope and disbelief. How do you know? Sarah took a shaky breath. This was it. This was the moment all those 33s had been leading to. Because 3 years ago, I stopped believing he did. My father died of cancer, and I prayed for a miracle that never came. And for 3 years, I was so angry at God that I refused to even speak to him. I pushed him away, pushed everyone away. The woman was listening now, really listening. Sarah continued, but he never pushed me away. For the past 2 weeks, he's been waking me up at 3:33 every single morning, the exact time my father used to wake me to pray when I was a kid. At first, I thought I was going crazy, but now I think he was preparing me for this moment, for you, for me, to tell you that God doesn't give up on us, not even when we give up on him, not even when everything feels dark and impossible. He keeps reaching, he keeps calling, he keeps showing up in ways we don't expect. The woman's eyes filled with fresh tears. I want to believe that. I want to so badly, but I'm so scared. I know. Sarah squeezed her hand. I'm scared too, every day, but being scared doesn't mean he's not there. It just means we're human. The woman stared at Sarah for a long moment. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she asked, "Will you pray with me?" Sarah's breath caught. She hadn't prayed out loud with another person since her father died, hadn't even prayed alone until a few nights ago. Her throat felt tight, her hands felt clammy, but she looked at this broken woman beside her and felt something bigger than her fear. She felt called. "Yes," Sarah said, "I'll pray with you." They bowed their heads together right there on the curb, two strangers bound by grief and hope, and Sarah began to pray. The words came slowly at first, hesitant, broken, but as she prayed, something inside her cracked wide open. All the anger she'd carried, all the bitterness, All the questions about why her father had to suffer, all the guilt for walking away from God. It poured out in that prayer, not in neat sentences or theological language, just raw, honest, desperate words. She prayed for this woman's daughter. She prayed for healing. She prayed for peace. She prayed for strength to face whatever came next. And somewhere in the middle of that prayer, Sarah realized she wasn't just praying for a stranger. She was praying for herself. When Sarah finally said, "Amen," both women were crying, but it felt different now. Not the crying of despair, but of release. The woman wiped her eyes and smiled through her tears. "Thank you. I don't even know your name." "I'm Sarah." "Rebecca," she paused, then let out a small, broken laugh. "You know what's crazy? I've been sitting out here for 3 hours. 3 hours. Doctors and nurses were walking past and no one stopped. I felt invisible, like even God couldn't see me. And then you appeared." Sarah felt a chill run through her. 3 hours? I checked my phone when I first came out. It was 3:33 p.m. The world seemed to stop spinning. Sarah's hands started trembling. "Rebecca, what room is your daughter in?" Rebecca looked confused by the question. "Room 333. Why?" The air between them turned electric. Sarah could barely breathe. "This isn't a coincidence." "What do you mean?" Sarah explained everything. The 7 nights of waking at 3:33 a.m., her father's letter, the threes are appearing everywhere, Grace's words about the Trinity. The Bible verses are all pointing to the number 3, every single sign leading up to this exact moment. Rebecca's face went pale as she listened. "So you're telling me," Rebecca said slowly, "that God has been waking you up at 3:33 for 2 weeks, and my daughter is in room 333, and I've been sitting here since 3:33, and you just happened to walk outside right when I needed someone." "I don't think it just happened," Sarah whispered. Rebecca stared at her, then looked up at the darkening sky. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks, but this time they looked different. Awed, overwhelmed. "He really does see me," she breathed. "Even when I can't see him, he sees me." Sarah nodded, her own eyes burning. "He sees both of us." They sat in silence for a moment, letting the weight of it all settle. Then Rebecca spoke again, her voice steadier now. "Can I tell you something? About my daughter?" "Of course." Rebecca took a shaky breath. "Her name is Emma. She's been struggling with addiction for 3 years. We've tried everything. Rehab 3 times, therapy, support groups, nothing worked. She'd get clean for a few months, then relapse. Every time it got worse." Sarah listened, her heart aching for this mother. "6 months ago I gave up," Rebecca continued, her voice thick with guilt. "I told her I couldn't watch her destroy herself anymore, that if she wasn't willing to get better, I couldn't keep enabling her. So I cut her off, stopped answering her calls, stopped giving her money. I thought tough love would wake her up. But it didn't. No, it pushed her further away. And 3 days ago, her roommate found her unconscious on the bathroom floor, blue lips, no pulse. The paramedics had to use Narcan twice to bring her back." Rebecca's voice broke. "And all I could think was, what if the last thing I ever said to my daughter was, 'Don't call me until you're ready to change'?" Sarah squeezed her hand tighter. "When I got to the hospital," Rebecca continued, "the doctors told me she'd been without oxygen for several minutes, that even if she survived, there might be brain damage. And I've been sitting here thinking, this is my punishment for giving up on her, for not loving her enough." "That's not true," Sarah said firmly. "How do you know?" "Because guilt is talking, not truth. You didn't cause this, Rebecca. Addiction is a disease, and sometimes loving someone means setting boundaries, even when it hurts. You didn't give up on her. You were trying to save her the only way you knew how." Rebecca shook her head. "But what if I was wrong? What if she needed me to keep fighting and I just walked away?" Sarah turned to face her fully. "My father fought cancer for 6 months. 6 months of chemo and radiation and experimental treatments. He never gave up, never stopped believing God would heal him. And you know what happened? He died anyway. And I spent 3 years thinking it was my fault, that I didn't pray hard enough, that I didn't have enough faith." "But that wasn't true," Rebecca said softly. "No, it wasn't. And this isn't your fault either. You did everything you could. You loved your daughter the best way you knew how. And now all you can do is trust that God's holding her even when you can't." Rebecca closed her eyes, fresh tears streaming. "I want to believe that." Then believe it, because he didn't bring me out here by accident. He didn't wake me up every night at 3:33 for no reason. He orchestrated all of this, every impossible coincidence, every strange pattern, to make sure you knew one thing: you're not alone. Emma's not alone. He's been here the whole time. At that moment, the emergency room doors burst open. A doctor in scrubs walked out, scanning the courtyard. When he saw Rebecca, he called out, "Mrs. Chen!" Rebecca jumped to her feet, and Sarah stood with her, still holding her hand. "That's me," Rebecca said, her voice shaking. The doctor approached, and Sarah couldn't read his expression. Her heart pounded in her chest. She squeezed Rebecca's hand tighter. "Your daughter is stable," the doctor said. Rebecca let out a sound somewhere between a sob and a laugh. "She's stable." "Yes, her vitals have improved significantly over the last hour. She's breathing on her own. We're still running tests, but the preliminary scans show no signs of permanent brain damage. She's extremely lucky." "Can I see her?" "Yes, she's still unconscious, but you can sit with her." Rebecca turned to Sarah, tears pouring down her face, and pulled her into a fierce hug. Thank you for stopping, for praying, for reminding me that God hasn't forgotten us." Sarah hugged her back, her own tears falling freely. "He never forgot you, not for a second." When Rebecca pulled away, she looked at Sarah with wonder in her eyes. "You know what's strange? When the doctor walked out just now, I looked at my watch. It's 7:33, 3 again." Sarah's breath caught. She hadn't even noticed. "I don't think the tears are going to stop," Rebecca said with a watery smile. "I think they're going to follow me for the rest of my life now, a reminder that God orchestrates things we can't see." Sarah nodded, unable to speak. Rebecca squeezed her hand one more time. "I don't know if we'll ever see each other again, but I won't forget this. I won't forget you. I won't forget you either." Rebecca turned and walked back toward the emergency room doors. Before she went inside, she looked back at Sarah one more time. "Thank you for being obedient," she called out, "even when you didn't understand why." Then she disappeared inside. Sarah stood alone in the courtyard as the sky turned dark. The city lights flickered on around her. Car horns honked in the distance. Life continued as if nothing extraordinary had just happened. But something extraordinary had happened. Sarah looked up at the sky, at the first stars appearing in the twilight, and whispered the words that had been building in her chest. "Thank you for not giving up on me, for chasing me with love until I turned around, for using my brokenness for something beautiful. Thank you." The sky didn't open. No angelic choir sang, no voice boomed from heaven, but Sarah felt it, a warmth spreading through her chest, a peace she hadn't felt in 3 years, a knowing that went deeper than words. God had heard her father's prayers, had been answering them all along in ways Sarah couldn't see until she was ready. The 3:33 wake-ups hadn't been a haunting, they'd been an invitation. And tonight, on a curb outside an emergency room with a stranger who needed hope, Sarah had finally answered. She pulled out her phone to check the time, almost laughing before she even looked. 9:33 p.m. Of course! Sarah drove home that night in complete silence. No music, no podcast, no phone calls, just her and her thoughts and the gentle presence of someone she'd tried so hard to push away. When she pulled into her driveway, the babysitter met her at the door. "They were angels tonight," the sitter said, "already asleep by 8. Sarah thanked her, paid her, and walked inside. The house was quiet, peaceful. She checked on Miguel first. He was sprawled across his bed, one leg hanging off the side, exactly like her father used to sleep. Sarah smiled and pulled the blanket over him. Then she went to Sophia's room. Her daughter was curled up with her stuffed rabbit, breathing softly. Sarah knelt beside the bed and brushed the hair from Sophia's forehead. "Your grandpa would be so proud of you," she whispered. And in that moment, Sarah felt him, not literally, but spiritually. A presence so familiar and comforting it made her chest ache. He was proud of her too. Sarah went to her own room and sat on her bed with her father's Bible. This time, she didn't flip to random pages. She turned to Psalm 121, one of his favorites. "I lift up my eyes to the mountains. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. He will not let your foot slip. He who watches over you will not slumber. He who watches over you will not slumber. Sarah closed her eyes and let the truth of it wash over her. God hadn't been sleeping, hadn't been ignoring her, hadn't abandoned her in her grief. He'd been watching, waiting, preparing her for the moment when she'd be ready to hear him again. And when that moment came, he'd made absolutely sure she couldn't miss it. The 33 wake-ups stopped after that night, but Sarah didn't need them anymore. She'd gotten the message. Over the following weeks and months, everything began to shift, not all at once, not dramatically, but slowly, like a ship changing course 1 degree at a time. Sarah started praying again, not the desperate bargaining prayers from before, not the rehearsed, going through the motions prayers of her childhood. Real prayers, honest prayers. Prayers that admitted she didn't have all the answers and probably never would. Prayers that said, I'm still angry about some things, but I'm here. Prayers that said, I don't understand your plan, but I trust you have one. Prayers that said, use me, even when I'm broken, especially when I'm broken. She started reading her father's Bible every night after the kids went to bed. Not as a chore, not as an obligation, but as a conversation with the God who chased her with the number 3 until she finally turned around. Grace noticed the change at work. You look different, she said one afternoon as they prepped a patient for surgery. Lighter somehow. Sarah smiled. I feel different, like I've been carrying a weight I didn't even realize was there, and someone finally helped me set it down. That's what happens when you stop running from God and start running toward Him, Grace said with a knowing look. The burden gets easier, not because life gets easier, but because you're not carrying it alone anymore. Sarah's relationship with her kids shifted too. One night at dinner, Miguel asked, Mom, can we say grace before we eat? Sarah's throat tightened. You want to pray? Yeah, like Grandpa used to. Sophia nodded enthusiastically. I want to pray too. So they held hands around their small kitchen table, Sarah, Miguel, and Sophia, and prayed together for the first time in 3 years. It was messy. The kids got distracted halfway through. Sophia started giggling. Miguel forgot what he was saying. But it was perfect. After they said Amen, Miguel looked at his mom with serious eyes. Grandpa's in heaven, right? Yes, baby, he is. Do you think he can hear us when we pray? Sarah thought about the 33 wake-ups, the letter her father had written, the impossible timing of everything that led to Rebecca, the way God had used her father's death to eventually bring Sarah back to faith. I think Grandpa's prayers are still being answered, she said softly. Even now, Miguel seemed satisfied with that answer. Sophia asked for more broccoli, which was its own kind of miracle, and Sarah sat there, watching her kids eat and laugh and argue over who got the last piece of garlic bread, and felt overwhelming gratitude. She'd almost missed this, almost stayed stuck in bitterness and grief, almost refused to hear what God was trying to tell her. But He'd been persistent, relentless, loving enough to chase her even when she was running. A few weeks after the encounter with Rebecca, Sarah was cleaning out her car when she found a crumpled piece of paper under the passenger seat. A receipt from the hospital cafeteria. The date caught her eye. The day she'd first noticed it was 3:33 p.m., the day this whole journey had started. The total at the bottom, $3.33. Sarah laughed out loud, shaking her head. Even now, the reminders continued. One afternoon, about a month after that night in the hospital courtyard, Sarah's phone rang during her lunch break. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. Hello, Sarah, this is Rebecca. Rebecca Chen from the hospital. Sarah's heart jumped. Rebecca, oh my goodness, how are you? How's Emma? There was a pause, then Rebecca's voice came through, thick with emotion. She's awake. She's been awake for 2 weeks now. No brain damage. She's going to be okay. Sarah felt tears spring to her eyes. That's incredible. It is, and Sarah, she wants to get clean, really clean this time. She starts a 90-day inpatient program next week. She's scared, but she's ready. That's amazing, Rebecca. I know, and I needed to call you, to tell you what happened after that night. Sarah sat down on a bench outside the hospital, gripping her phone. Rebecca continued, When I went into Emma's room that night, I was different. I don't know how to explain it, but praying with you, hearing your story, realizing that God had orchestrated all of those impossible coincidences just to make sure I knew He was there, it changed something in me. I felt it too, Sarah said softly. I sat with Emma for hours. She was still unconscious, and I just talked to her, told her everything. How sorry I was for walking away, how much I loved her. How God had sent a stranger to remind me that He never gives up on us, so I couldn't give up on her either. Rebecca's voice broke. And Sarah, the next morning when she woke up, the first thing she said was, "Mom, I had the strangest dream. I dreamed that Grandma was with me and she kept saying, 3 chances. You get 3 chances." And then I woke up. Sarah's breath caught. 3 chances? Emma's grandmother, my mother, died 3 years ago. Emma was close to her, and this was Emma's 3rd overdose. We almost lost her 3 times. The number 3. Again and again and again. "Rebecca," Sarah whispered. God wasn't just speaking to me, He was speaking to both of us, to Emma, to all 3 of us. "I know," Rebecca said, crying now. "That's what I wanted to tell you. You didn't just save me that night. You saved my daughter. Because if you hadn't stopped, if you hadn't prayed with me, if you hadn't reminded me that God was still there, I don't think I would have had the strength to walk into that room and fight for her again." Sarah wiped her own tears. "I was just obedient. God did the rest." "Well, your obedience changed our lives. Emma wants to meet you someday when she's further in her recovery. I told her about you, about the 333s, about everything. And she said it was the most beautiful thing she'd ever heard." They talked for a few more minutes, exchanging numbers and promising to stay in touch. When Sarah hung up, she sat on that bench for a long time, staring at the sky. 3 lives changed. Hers, Rebecca's, Emma's, all because God refused to let her ignore the number 3. Sarah's work began to feel different too. She'd always been good at her job, competent, professional, and caring. But now there was something more. A sense of purpose that went beyond checking vitals and administering medication. She started really seeing her patients, not just as cases or room numbers, but as people with stories, with fears, with families praying in waiting rooms. She prayed for them silently as she worked. She asked God to guide her hands, to give her wisdom, to help her be a light in what was often the darkest moment of people's lives. One evening, she was caring for an elderly man named Thomas who just had open-heart surgery. He was scared, couldn't sleep, kept pressing his call button every few minutes. Sarah sat with him instead of just giving him more medication. "What are you afraid of?" she asked gently. Thomas looked at her with watery eyes. "Dying alone. My wife passed 2 years ago. My kids live across the country. I don't want to be alone if something happens." Sarah took his hand. "You're not alone. I'm right here. And I promise, if something happens on my shift, you won't face it by yourself." "You do that? You don't even know me." "I know you're a child of God. That's enough." Thomas started crying. Sarah stayed with him until he fell asleep, which wasn't technically part of her job description, but it was part of her calling. The next morning, Thomas's daughter called the hospital to thank Sarah personally. She said her father hadn't slept that peacefully in months. Grace pulled Sarah aside later. "I heard about Thomas. That was beautiful what you did." Sarah shrugged. "I just sat with him." "No," Grace said firmly. "You ministered to him. There's a difference. You're not just a nurse anymore, Sarah. You're a vessel. And God is using you in ways you probably don't even realize yet." The words settled deep in Sarah's spirit. A vessel. That's what her father had always said faith was about. Emptying yourself so God could fill you up and pour through you into others. Sarah had spent 3 years trying to do everything in her own strength, trying to hold it all together through sheer willpower. But she'd been empty the whole time. Now she was letting herself be filled, and the overflow was touching people she never would have reached before. 6 months after the 33 encounters began, Sarah found herself back at her father's grave for the first time since the funeral. She brought flowers, sat on the grass, talked to him like he was sitting right there. "I get it now, Dad. I understand what you meant in your letter, about losing you being the beginning, not the end. I had to be broken open to really understand what faith meant, what surrender meant, what it looks like to trust God even when you can't see the plan." The wind rustled through the trees. A bird sang somewhere nearby. You were right about 3:33, about the Trinity, about God speaking in patterns I couldn't ignore. I'm still not glad you're gone. I still miss you every single day. But I'm grateful for what you taught me, for praying for this moment even when you knew you wouldn't be here to see it. Sarah traced her fingers over his name on the headstone. Roberto Martinez, beloved father, man of faith. I'm going to keep praying, Dad, for my kids, for my patients, for strangers who need hope. I'm going to keep being obedient even when I don't understand why. Because I finally learned what you tried to teach me all along. God is always speaking. We just have to be willing to listen. She stayed there for an hour, sitting in peaceful silence, feeling connected to her father in a way that death couldn't break. When she finally stood to leave, she checked her phone. 3:33 p.m. Sarah smiled. I hear you, I'm listening. Life didn't become perfect after that. Sarah still struggled with bills, still got exhausted from double shifts, still had moments of doubt and frustration and grief. But she wasn't drowning anymore. She'd learned to recognize God's voice in the repetition, in the patterns, in the impossible coincidences that were actually divine appointments. She'd learned that sometimes God whispers, and sometimes he shouts through numbers you can't stop seeing until you finally pay attention. She'd learned that being broken isn't the end. It's often the beginning of something more beautiful than you could have built on your own. And most importantly, she'd learned that God's love is relentless, persistent, patient enough to wake you at 3:33 a.m. for 7 nights in a row until you finally understand that you're not forgotten. You're pursued. A year later, Sarah started a prayer group at the hospital. Small, just 5 nurses who met once a week before their shifts to pray for their patients, for each other, and for divine encounters. Grace was the first to join. Then 3 others. Sarah thought about that as they prayed together one morning. 5 people, not 3, but their meeting time, 3:33 a.m. Because some patterns don't end. They just evolve into new beginnings. And Sarah was finally ready for whatever God had next. So here's what I want you to understand. Sarah's story isn't just about her. It's about every single person who's ever felt abandoned by God. Every person who's prayed desperate prayers that seem to go unanswered. Every person who's walked away from faith because the pain was too great. God doesn't give up on you. He might speak in ways you don't expect. Through numbers, through strangers, through impossible timing that can't be explained by coincidence. But he's speaking. The question is, are you listening? Maybe you've been seeing repeating numbers and dismissing them. Maybe you've had strange coincidences that made you pause, but you talked yourself out of believing they meant anything. Maybe you're going through a season of darkness right now and you feel completely alone. You're not. God is closer than your next breath. And sometimes he'll chase you with love so persistent, it shows up in the smallest, strangest details of your life until you finally turn around and realize he was there all along. Sarah's 3:33 wasn't just a wake-up call. It was an invitation to stop running, to stop hiding, to open the door she'd locked 3 years ago and let God back in. And if you're watching this right now, maybe this video is your invitation. Maybe finding this story wasn't an accident. Maybe God orchestrated every click, every scroll, and every algorithm that led you here because he wanted you to know one simple truth. He hasn't forgotten you. So pay attention to the patterns. Notice the repetitions. Look for God in the places you least expect, because he's been speaking to you all along. You just needed a reminder to listen. Here at the Wisdom of Time, we believe that every story holds a mirror to our own lives, that the spiritual world is constantly speaking to us through signs, synchronicities, and moments we're too busy to notice. If this story touched your heart, I want you to do something right now. Like this video, if you felt the presence of God in Sarah's story. Speech balloon comment below with your number. The one you keep seeing, the pattern that won't leave you alone, the coincidence that keeps happening. Bell subscribe to the Wisdom of Time and turn on notifications so you never miss a story that might be meant specifically for you. Mobile phone, share this video with someone who needs to know they're not alone, that God hasn't given up on them. Your breakthrough might be hidden in plain sight. Your divine appointment might be happening right now, in this very moment, as you watch this video. Don't miss what God is trying to show you. The wisdom of time exists to remind you that your story matters. Your struggles matter. Your faith journey, no matter how broken or messy, matters to God. Leave a comment right now. Tell us your number. Tell us your story, because someone else watching needs to hear it. Someone else needs to know they're not crazy for noticing the patterns. They're not alone in seeking signs. And maybe your comment will be the thing that changes someone else's life today. Because that's how God works, through obedience, through vulnerability, through one person's story inspiring another person's breakthrough. Welcome to the wisdom of time, where every coincidence has a purpose and every story matters. See you in the next one. Clipboard disclaimer. Disclaimer. The stories presented on the Wisdom of Time are fictional and created for the purpose of spiritual reflection, inspiration, and moral exploration. Any resemblance to real people, events, or situations is purely coincidental. These narratives are designed to inspire faith, encourage positive transformation, and provide meaningful life lessons rooted in the teachings and wisdom of Jesus Christ. The experiences and encounters described should not be interpreted as literal historical accounts, but rather as inspirational parables meant to deepen your spiritual journey and connection with God.